Hello, everyone. This will be the final part of Phase 3 of the DCEU, which I will be redubbing the Apocalypse Saga. Now, without further delay, let's begin. The movie that'll be capping off the Apocalypse Saga will be The Flashpoint Paradox. This will not only be a Justice League movie, but as well as the third film in the Flash trilogy. We open up to a dark, stormy night where the camera would loom over Wayne Manor. Inside, we would see Barry Allen tied up on a chair, whilst we would also see Thomas Wayne pacing around him before he would suddenly punch Barry across the face. I'm going to ask you one more time. Who are you, and how do you know so much about me? Look, I already told you, I don't know how I got here. Something happened and... Barry is then cut off with a swift punch to his gut, causing him to cough out blood. I have ways of making guys like you talk. Thomas Wayne would then pull out multiple surgical tools, which would understandably make Barry very nervous, and he would try to tell him that he has no idea how he got here. And what's even more surprising is he has seemingly lost his powers in the process. We would then see this alternate Batman pull out a surgical knife in which he would slowly approach Barry. I found you unconscious on my lawn, so I just assumed you were some stupid drunk passed out. But seeing as how you apparently know so much about my life, this will be the last time I'm going to ask, he says as he holds the knife up to Barry's neck, drawing a bit of blood. Now, who are you? My name is Barry Allen. I got my powers from an accident at Star Labs. I don't know how I got here, but the world where I came from, it was destroyed by a god named Darkseid. Never heard of him. Well, you probably haven't heard of him yet, but he's really strong. It took the entire Justice League just to take him down, and even then we still failed. He managed to fuse the mother boxes together and, well, everyone and everything died. You mentioned something about a Justice League. What's that? It's a team of superheroes. It has a guy named Superman, you know? He's really strong, he flies fast, he shoots lasers, and also an Amazon princess named Wonder Woman, and Cyborg, Aquaman, and also Batman. Well, not you, but the other Batman, Bruce. Thomas Wayne, at the mention of that name, would tighten his grip on his knife. So what? You mean to tell me that you're from some sort of parallel universe? Yeah, I know that's hard to believe, but it's the truth, I swear. Barry says as the knife is pressing deeper into his neck before it suddenly releases and Batman puts the knife on the ground. If what you're saying is true, then how come you lost your powers in the first place? I don't know. It must have been a result of me traveling to this universe. I might have not gotten my powers yet. You mentioned something before about a mother box. I might know a guy who has more expertise in that area. He also has a way to tell if you're really lying about being from another universe. I'll take you to him. But if it turns out that you are lying, you'll have to answer to me, Batman says as he unbinds Barry from his restraints. Barry rubs his knuckles. All right. But can you just take me to him? The sooner I get out of here, the better. Both Batman and Barry would then enter the Batwing and would exit out of the Batcave and take off into the night sky. Whilst they're in the Batwing, Barry would look hesitant before he would ask Thomas, what made you become Batman? Batman would just coldly say, you're lucky enough that you're on a puddle of blood on my floor. So unless you want that to happen, you won't ask me any dumb questions. Barry would then promptly shut his mouth as the two would begin to continue to ride the Batwing in silence. The sun would rise on a beautiful beach. and we would see many figures approaching the shore. These figures would appear to be Amazons, with the one in front particularly being the alternate version of Wonder Woman. The Amazons would stand in front of the shore as if they were expecting someone or something, and as if on cue, an army of blue men would arise from the waters, with the only two people in front that looked somewhat humanoid would be King Arthur and his wife, Queen Mara. The two factions would then stare each other down until King Arthur would outstretch his hands and Queen Diana would do the same, prompting the two factions to cheer and celebrate, as this would be the ceremony that would align both the Atlantean and the Amazonian kingdoms to finally come in terms with each other. Let this day become one of triumph and victory, as our two alliances shall merge together and become one defining force. I couldn't agree more, Arthur said, and what would follow is a celebration that would take place on this monumental day. But unbeknownst to the individuals on the beach, they would be monitored secretly by a camera that was out of their reach. And on the other end of the surveillance, we would see a militarized base. We would see many soldiers working on each of their individual programs. The two most notable individuals in that room would be Amanda Waller and Rick Flag Jr. For the most part, they seemed to be making peace with each other, Rick Flag said. For now, said Waller. We just have to make sure that they don't pose a threat to us. But what if they do? What the hell can we even do to even tickle them? Don't underestimate the forces of the U.S. Army, General. And even if all else fails, we still have Project Solar tucked away in our back pockets. The Batjet finally arrives in its intended location, and we would see both Batman and Barry exit and approach a mysterious laboratory. Where are we? Somewhere I'll know if you're telling the truth. Batman would then look up at the camera that was on top of the door, and as if on cue, the door would open and both of the men would step inside, in which they would stumble across a hidden laboratory that was filled with all sorts of machinery and gadgets. Barry would look around with a sense of amazement, whilst Batman would look concentrated. Where are we? You'll find out. And right after he said that line, a man, alas, half a man, would step out of the shadows. This would be revealed as Cyborg, or at least this universe's version of Cyborg. If my sensors weren't glitching, I would have figured that Batman was standing right in front of me. Your sensors are fine, Victor. Cyborg would then look at Barry. So who's the spare? That's what I want you to find out. I want you to run a scan on his entire body. This man claims he's from an alternate universe, which understandably I find quite hard to believe. Which is why Victor would cut off Batman by having his eye scanner trim through Barry's entire genetic makeup within a second, before his scanner would then close and he would conclude, yep, he's from an alternate universe, alright. His internal organs are reversed and his heart's on the left side of his chest. Plus, my records indicate that our Barry Allen died almost 10 years ago. But the question that I really want to know is how exactly did he get here? That's what I want to know. But if anything, is there any way you can get me back home? Interdimensional travel is nothing new to me, but there is a certain component that I might need. A mother box. Luckily, I have all the other components that I'll need to build this machine. But unfortunately for you, the only mother box left on Earth would be in the hands of a certain government agency. Batman would mumble, Waller. Yep. Barry would say, well, what are we waiting for? Let's go. Hold on. What do you mean by let's? I'm going back to my house. Yeah, and you really didn't say anything about what's in it for me either. Barry would look dejected. Look, guys, you may not know me, and I might not know you, but in my universe, we're practically comrades, and if there's anything that Bruce has taught me, he says as he looks at Batman, is how we should never abandon a comrade in need. And you, he looks at Cyborg, you're one of the greatest, if not the greatest minds on the planet. Plus, you have a special connection with the mother box that no one else has. If you guys help me, I could potentially go back in time to save my own world and stop everyone from getting destroyed. Batman and Cyborg would then look at each other, wagering if they should really help this new arrival, or if they should just let an entire universe be destroyed. And with a heavy sigh, Cyborg would just say, alright, you strike a hard deal, kid. Batman would begrudgingly agree. As if nothing else, this could be a way he could be able to save Bruce. But before we go anywhere, you'll need to get your powers back. If you go in there headstrong, you'll get shot in 2 seconds. I was thinking about that, but there might be a way where I could replicate the accident of which I got my powers. But in order to do that, it needs to be raining, and I'll have to get on the roof. In Themyscira, we would catch a glimpse of Amazonians as well as Atlanteans. Walking amongst each other, we would see none other than Queen Diana staring down from her balcony, in which not too long after, King Arthur would approach her and stand beside her. After centuries of battle, it's hard to believe that we finally united. Indeed, this moment shall be put on the history books as one of the most monumental occasions to have ever happened. Diana would then look at Arthur. But why stop there? There could be a way we could solidify our alliances even further. She says this as she starts to nudge her hand near Arthur's, but before anything else could happen, Queen Mera would appear as something to grab Arthur's hand and inform him. So with that, one of both the Atlanteans and Mera would leave the room, leaving Queen Diana to stare at his back. King Arthur and Queen Mera would then enter the Atlantean chambers, in which one of his soldiers would inform him of strange anomalies appearing within the waters. The soldier would show Arthur a holographic image within the depths of the ocean, in which a strange symbol would appear to be enlightened on the ocean floor. King Arthur would recognize this symbol as once when he was young, his mother would show him tapestries of the Atlantean history in which this symbol would often appear, and it was meant to be a sign of death. Simultaneously, Queen Diana would enter her Amazonian chambers, in which her subordinates would show her a holographic image of an army of ships outside in space, in which they would be nearly crossing Mars. On this ship, she notices the strange symbol that Arthur noticed, the symbol of death. The sky would be dim with rain and lightning. We would see Batman, Cyborg, as well as Barry Allen tied to a chair with multiple chemicals surrounding him. Cyborg would ask, "Are you sure this would work? Because if not, you might as well be dead." Barry would reinform Cyborg that this was the only way in which he could get his powers back. Batman would advise them to stand back, and as Batman and Cyborg would do so, lightning would envelop Barry as he would scream in agony, and the chemicals would proceed to splash all around his body. Both Batman and Cyborg would shield their eyes from the blinding flash, and when it was done, both of them would look on to see Barry unconscious, barely burnt, and badly injured. A couple of days would pass, and Barry would slowly open his eyes to realize that he was covered in bandages, as well as in a hospital bed. he would look to his right to see Batman sitting by him, as well as Cyborg tending to his wounds. Cyborg would then inform Barry of the bad news of how the accident did not work and that all he got from it was near death. But Barry would be resolute in his conviction, stating that he has to try again. Batman would then begin to question Barry's sanity, stating at how if this lightning strike didn't kill him, then the next one would certainly. But Barry, remembering his friends, Iris and Wally, would stand firm in his beliefs and that he has to try again. And so, after a few hours, Barry is back on the rooftop, this time encapsulated in bandages, while also being tied up to a chair with multiple chemicals surrounding him, as it would still appear to be raining. Batman and Cyborg would look on, unsure of the outcome, until suddenly a lightning bolt would envelop Barry once again, and this time it would strike even more down hard on him, and Barry would begin to scream in agony, with both Batman and Cyborg covering their eyes as they would lower their gazes and look on to see Barry on the ground, seemingly dead. But this time, something different happens as lightning, not blue lightning, but rather yellow lightning, would begin to envelop his body, and as if like magic, his wounds would be magically healed. And his eyes would shot open with little lightning bolts in his irises before he would rise up and break free from his bandages, now seemingly phasing, as he would start running around the room in supersonic speed, ecstatic that it has worked. "Well, I'll be damned," Batman says. Cyborg, with a smile on his face. "Well, what are we waiting for? Let's go get that mother box." We would cut to a government base where we would see multiple militarized soldiers apparently staring at a screen, as Waller would then walk into the room with Rip Flag garnering her attention. "Boss, you might want to look at this." Waller would then look at the screen, and she would appear to see an army of ships barely passing by the moon, and they appear to be entering the Earth's atmosphere. But what catches her attention would be the strange symbol on these ships. "So what, an alien invasion?" she says, rather bored. "It appears so. Should we release Project Solar?" "No, not yet. Let's see what their intentions are. But if they cross our stratosphere, open fire." But whilst they're distracted by the upcoming alien armada, we would see the Batwing being piloted by Batman, as well as the Flash and Cyborg in the back seats, in which they managed to fly by undetected, in which Batman, Cyborg, and the Flash would exit out of the Batjet and land within military grounds, in which Flash would quickly make do of the guards that were surrounding the place, which would allow Batman and Cyborg to sneak inside undetected. Whilst inside, the trio would manage to stumble upon an assortment of items, but then they would eventually find the mother box they had been seeking in a closely guarded room. Batman would then take out a device from his utility belt and stick it onto the door, which, as if on cue, would neutralize the security defenses and allow the door to open, allowing the trio to snatch the mother box and enter out of the room. But unfortunately, there has been a secret alarm that Batman was unaware of, and it triggers as soon as they touch the mother box, which would gather everyone in the base's attention, including Waller. "Someone has the mother box! Stop them!" she says. As if on cue, hordes of military men would surround the trio, which they would make quick work of, with Batman using his expertise in martial arts as well as medical experience to bring down any guards that would approach him, with Cyborg easily manhandling any guard with his cybernetic body, and Flash would make quick work using a succession of fast punches. Waller would see this in the security camera, and seeing how she realizes that the regular guards would be no match for the intruders, as they appear to be metahumans, she sighs and looks at Rick Flag. "Release Project Solar. Rick Flag would oblige and exit the room to enter a secret passageway in which inside would be a combination of numbers. He would press on a specific combination, in which, as if on cue, deep within the bowels of the military base, deep within underground, we would see a pair of glowing red eyes. The trio would be making work of any of the last remaining security guards, with the Flash remarking, "Wow, that was easier than I thought." Batman would tell him, "Stay on guard. You never know what else Waller might have up her sleeve." Cyborg would then look at Batman. "Well, the kid's right, Bats." And the ground would erupt from underneath them, and a hand would grab Cyborg by the mouth and would proceed to toss him into the wall, creating a massive hole. Batman would quickly use his smoke pellets to try and blind the creature, but it would be no use, as the creature would attempt to swipe at Batman, but Flash would get him out the way in time, and both of them would look on to see a pair of glowing eyes. Superman? However, this was not the Kryptonian that Flash was familiar with. Rather, this one appeared to be female with blonde hair. This would be Kara Zor-El, as she would dash at the Flash with blinding speeds, tackling him and punching him through a wall. She would then look at Batman, who in defense would try to raise up his hand, but Kara would simply grab his wrist, break it, which would cause Batman immeasurable amounts of pain, in which she would proceed to push him through a wall, dislocating his shoulder in the process. She would then look towards her other opponents and dash towards Cyborg, grabbing him by the neck and ripping his mechanical arm off. The Flash would recover from his hit, and he would look on and yell, "Kara, stop! It's me!" Before he would quickly realize that he is in an alternate universe, and this version of Kara would have no recollection of who he was, and so he would then ask her, "What happened to Kal-El?" Which would temporarily stop Kara in her tracks, as her red eyes would proceed to dim down into her natural blue ones, as she would look towards the Flash. "How do you know that name?" "Look, you might not believe me, but I'm from an alternate universe. And in my universe, me and Kal-El are pretty much like friends. And you didn't arrive until much later. So, where exactly is Kal-El?" Kara would then proceed to descend back onto the floor, in which she would look down with a somber expression. And we would peer inside her mind, where she appears to be regulating a flashback in which she remembers how she was sent from Krypton to Earth in order to protect Kal-El. However, something went horribly wrong, and Kal-El's ship had hit an asteroid field, unfortunately killing her cousin. And this unexpected asteroid field had also diverged her spaceship's pattern, in which she would still land on Earth, but this time she would land within feet of a United States military base, in which she would be found not by a loving family, but cold, hardened soldiers, and we'll then flash forward to see her in her late teenage years being treated as a sort of weapon, similar to how Homelander grew up in The Boys, and we would see the soldiers testing her durability as well as her endurance and many other trials, and we would cut back to the present day where she is staring at the ground with subtle tears in her eyes, and Amanda Waller would see this in the camera and would proceed to shout in her earpiece to kill these invaders or else she will kill her. Kara would disregard this threat as she would shoot up into the air, creating a crater on the ceiling before darting off into the distance, leaving her destroyed earpiece on the floor. The trio would then look up at the hole that she made, with Cyborg holding his detached arm. "Could have started with that, maybe?" he asked the Flash. And with that, the trio would then exit out of the military base, and Batman would call upon his Batjet, in which the trio would then proceed to make their way back to Cyborg's laboratory. Back in Themyscira, we would see Queen Diana in her quarters staring at her fireplace until a knock would suddenly be made upon her door, and she would look back to see King Arthur entering into her room. "I assume you saw the anomalies as well?" Arthur asked. "Indeed. It appears that we have a great battle ahead of us." Arthur would start to approach the queen. "Yes, and I've been giving some thought of how you said we could make our alliances even greater," Arthur said as he reached for Diana's hand, in which she would turn back, and the two would proceed to move their faces closer until they would ultimately kiss, in which one thing would lead to another. But unbeknownst to the both of them, Queen Mera would be watching from the crack of the door, and she would look heartbroken and angry. The next morning, we would see Queen Diana sharpening her sword in her chambers, but while she was doing that, her door would suddenly burst open, revealing Queen Mera in all her fury. Queen Diana would be a little confused, but Queen Mera would hear none of it, as she would start to strike at Diana. So as a way to defend herself, Diana would strike the Atlantean queen with her blade, cutting her head off, with her body falling limply to the ground. Another Amazon would enter the room to see the carnage, and Diana would look at her. "Well, what are you waiting for? Dispose of the trash," as she would look down at the Atlantean queen with disgust. A few days later, a funeral would be held in Queen Mera's honor. We would see King Arthur looking distraught and furious. Queen Diana would attend the funeral as well and attempt to comfort Arthur, but Arthur would look at her with fury in his eyes as he would proceed to smack away her hand. "How dare you show your face here," he said with malice. Queen Diana would try to defend herself, stating as how Mera was the one who attacked her, and she was only acting in self-defense. But Arthur was having none of it, as he swore that the war between the Atlanteans and the Amazonians shall continue, as he would take his troops and he would regather, regroup, and come back with the sole purpose of destroying Themyscira and killing the queen. As he says this, he, as well as all of the other Atlanteans, would evaporate into water, not giving the opportunities for the Amazonians to strike them down now. And Diana would be left with a face of apprehension, sighing to herself as she knew that another war was oncoming. Back at Cyborg's lab, he, along with Batman, would begin to work on Barry's way back home, as Barry himself would be sitting on the roof, reminiscing about his universe. That would be until Cyborg would call him down, telling him that the machine is finally ready. And so Barry would start to approach the machine, and both Cyborg and Batman would explain its properties, stating how it is basically portable. So the good part is they could move it anywhere without it being disrupted. The bad part is there's only one shot for Barry to get home, so if he misses this one, he is stuck here forever. Barry understands the assignment and is about to step inside into the machine. That would be until a streak of yellow and red would bust down the door and would appear to scramble the machine's properties in a supersonic way, in which the same streak would bash Batman into the wall, as well as push Cyborg away. Barry would attempt to use his speed to combat the streak, in which the streak would then run out of the door in the same fashion as it left, with Barry chasing it down. Barry would be confused, as he thought he was the only speedster left in this world, but as the streak would manage to gain more speed, Barry would lose sight of it, and Barry would be left confused. That would be until he looks back into the distance to see the military forces arriving at Cyborg's lab, and with a worried look, he rushes back into the lab, in which he sees Batman and Cyborg fighting off hordes of Amanda Waller's men, who are determined in retrieving the mother box. At the same time, Barry would look up into the sky to see an armada of alien ships with a peculiar symbol and it was a symbol that he recognizes all too well. And as if on cue, hordes of parademons would rain down from the sky, attacking any and anyone that moves. Batman and Cyborg would do their best to combat Amanda Waller's men, as well as the parademons that were surrounding them. At the same time, Aquaman, as well as the entire army of Atlantis, would rise up from the water, creating multiple tides that would crash onto many buildings, destroying many city blocks in their wake, whilst the Amazonians would appear on their Pegasuses, riding down into the ground, in which both the Atlanteans and the Amazonians would begin to clash, creating the ultimate war between the parademons, the Atlanteans, the Amazonians, as well as the Earth's military. In the midst of the ongoing chaos, we would see 6 teenagers looking at the TV, in which they would all nod their heads in unison, and each of them would join together, creating this universe's of Shazam, otherwise known as Captain Thunder, in which this new fighter would rocket out of his house and blast onto the battlefield, in which he would begin to fight the parademons. We would see Barry managing to get hold of the machine, and he would rocket out of the laboratory, attempting to get it out of harm's way. That is, until the same yellow and red streak from before would push him onto the ground, and he would still be holding onto the machine, but then he would look up to see a man wearing his exact costume, but with inverse colors. Barry, Barry, Barry. When will you learn? Barry would look up confused. Who the hell are you? Oh, excuse me for my lack of manners. Well, you'll know me soon enough. But, I know all about you. I mean, how could I not? Barry would look confused as this new figure would continue to ramble on. Oh, come on. You really thought you got here on your own free will? Come on, Barry, it was obviously me. Barry would then look at the figure with more contempt. You're the one who brought me here? And it wasn't easy. But, of course, you helped with your little tantrum back then. But, yeah, I guess it all worked out in the end. And, it was pretty awesome if I had to admit. But then you had to go and ruin the ride. I want to go back to my Earth. Yes. Lame. Barry would then hold out his hand. Look, I don't know who you are, but you obviously need help. Now, if you could let me do that. Help! I had help, the figure would say, as he would proceed to grab Barry's leg and drag him through the ground through multiple miles, as he would proceed to then throw Barry into a concrete wall in which Barry would crash onto, still holding the machine. And thankfully, it wasn't broken, but the figure would not let up, as he would continue to bombard Barry with multiple amounts of fast punches. Barry would try to block and dodge, but since he was holding the machine, it was hard to defend himself. So he tried to run away from the figure, but the figure had his same exact super speed, and both of them created individually red and yellow streaks that zoomed past the battlefield. Throughout the chaos, we would see them zoom past Aquaman and Wonder Woman as they would be engaged in their own battle, in which Aquaman would try his best to give a killing blow, but Wonder Woman was simply too skilled, as she would then cut his hands that was holding a trident, leaving him defenseless, as she would then strike his neck with her sword, killing the Atlantean king. Before she could celebrate this victory, she is then hoisted up into the air by Captain Thunder, who will then punch her back down into the ground. Wonder Woman would be surprised by this new arrival, as Captain Thunder would proceed to descend and tell her that she is causing many lives to be destroyed, and that she needs to stop now, or he'll stop her. Wonder Woman is not intimidated by this threat, as she and Captain Thunder would begin to engage in their own battle. We would see both the Flash and what is seemingly the Reverse Flash skid throughout the water, in which the Reverse Flash would be trying his best to harm Barry, whilst Barry would just be trying to keep the machine intact. But the two would soon arrive on land again, and Reverse Flash would hit Harry in the back of the head, causing him to stumble and trip in which he would fall down and skid across the ground, hitting a tree. But before he could get up, the Reverse Flash would rip off a piece of bark and stab Barry through the thigh, ensuring that he couldn't run anymore, and Barry would scream in pain before Reverse Flash would bombard him with a series of punches to his face. Well, Barry, this was fun, but it looks like you've reached the end of the line. And with that, the Reverse Flash would begin to speed across the earth, building up enough momentum for one final punch, which would have landed if it wasn't for the intervention of a flying figure, which would punch Reverse Flash across the face, causing him to skid across the ground before he could connect with Barry. Barry would then look at the figure, revealing itself to be none other than Supergirl. Now adorned in her traditional costume, Supergirl would then look at Barry. "You go ahead, I'll handle this little imposter." Barry would then remove the bark that was impaling his thigh and would look at Supergirl with a thankful expression before dashing off back to Cyborg's lab, where just finishing up the last amount of parademons as well as soldiers that were intruding. And so the Flash would put the machine back to its designated spot, and with a click of a button, he would then activate it, in which Cyborg, heavily damaged, would tell him that he has about 1 minute until the portal closes and that he has to get inside now. Meanwhile, the war would still be going on outside, with the hordes of parademons still fighting amongst the Atlanteans, the Amazonians, as well as Earth's forces, and we would see Captain Thunder and Wonder Woman trading blows, but due to Wonder Woman's experience, she has the upper hand, and so with a finishing blow, she slashes Captain Thunder with her blade across the chest, leaving him in a pool of blood. And before she could deal another blow, 2 lasers would pierce her head, causing her to bleed profusely and fall onto the ground, lifeless. And Captain Thunder would look up to see not a savior, but a god, a new god, Darkseid. And before Captain Thunder can utter another word, his Omega beams would then strike at Captain Thunder, killing him also. Darkseid would then look on onto the distance, sensing the presence of a mother box nearby, in which she would slowly float to that location. And before the Flash could step inside of the portal, he is then bombarded by a yellow and red streak, who manages to push him away and outside of the laboratory. And it appears to be Reverse Flash, who managed to escape from Supergirl's wrath and is now attacking the Flash with all of his might. And so, one final battle would occur between the Flash and Reverse Flash. But due to Barry's injured leg, the Reverse Flash has the upper hand, and he proceeds to beat down Barry with malice. And before he could land a finishing blow, he takes off his mask, revealing a face that Barry doesn't recognize. And before he could give Barry one last punch, he is shot through the head. And he would look around to see who has done it. And he would look back to see none other than Batman being the one to hold the gun. And with a disgusting plop, the Reverse Flash would fall limply on the ground. The Flash would look surprised at Batman, but his surprise would be nothing when he manages to catch a glimpse of Darkseid floating in the distance. And before Darkseid can make any further actions, he is then bombarded by Supergirl, who dashes onto him, remembering him, as he was the one reason why Krypton was destroyed. And so Supergirl and Darkseid would proceed to have their own battle, which would shake mountains and also cause massive earthquakes. And with little time to spare, Batman and the Flash would limply walk to the portal, with Cyborg waiting for them. The Flash would be feeling guilty that he was leaving this world in utter disarray, but Batman and Cyborg would reassure him that this world would survive and that he is needed in another world. And so, with one last somber look, the Flash would then enter inside of the portal. Before he could fully enter, Batman would then grab his arm and the Flash would look back at him until Batman would remove his cowl when you see my son, the tired face of Thomas Wayne. I'm sorry. It couldn't have been any other way. The Flash would then nod at him, and he would return back into his own world. And it would be moments before Darkseid of his world would be reuniting with all of the mother boxes as an attempt to destroy the universe. And so the Flash, with this new lesson installed, would begin to run. He would run as fast as he can, ensuring that he doesn't make the same mistake as he had last time. And so, with designated eyes of fire, he begins to break his limits and break past the Speed Force, ensuring that his world will not be destroyed. And all we would see is a blinding light until the screen would cut to black. The scene would then shift into a bright, sunny day, where we would see civilians going about their days as usual. And it would appear as which the timeline has been reset, and with Barry and his enormous sacrifice has given his life in order to trap Darkseid within the Speed Force, ensuring that he could never harm anyone or anything again. But with this sacrifice, there has come setbacks in which now both Superman and Batman are dead, leaving the only core remaining Justice League members being Aquaman, Wonder Woman, and Cyborgs. And we would cut to a cemetery in which we would see none other than Wally West approaching the tombstone of his mentor. And with a somber breath, he would look up onto the sunset, unsure of the trials and tribulations that lie ahead. Thank you guys so much for watching if you've made it this far. And yeah, I know I've been on a little bit of a hiatus as of recently, but now that the Apocalypse Saga of the DCEU is complete, my focus will now be completing the Secret War Saga of my version of the MCU. So just look out for those videos, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. And thank you so much for sticking with me throughout all these months.